right, well, welcome everybody to another episode of the Talented Learning Thought Leadership Webinar Series. This is our 90th episode, believe it or not, of this series, and it just keeps getting better with each one, and today always. So thanks today also. So thanks for joining in and paying attention here for today. And so we wanted to come up with this webinar. And so I'm joined here today by Tamer Ali, founder of Authentic Learning Labs. Hi, Tamer. Welcome.
Hi, John. Nice to be participating today. Thank you.
Yeah, Tamer's an expert. We'll introduce him here in a second. And but what we wanted to do today was show you and talk about what are the must-have features in 2022. So I spend my life on the front lines of LMS buying and selling. I have now for going on 22 years, been just in the negotiations, buying and selling and helping people buy now hundreds and hundreds of systems. And without a doubt, except in odd cases, whenever you buy a learning management system, you're usually on it for 3, 4, 5 years. Easy or longer. And it's just like when you buy a new car, and then all of a sudden after you write that first check or drive it home, you stop seeing car commercials. Even though they're still there, you just don't register them anymore. Well, LMSs and learning systems are the same way. So they continue to progress and advance after you buy your own system. And it's really easy to lose track of the pulse of what's going on. So what we wanted to do is all you folks that are stuck on an old learning management system, we want to make you jealous and show you what's on the cutting edge of the industry in a couple different sectors and try to bring it home with a bunch of 4 instances. And we got the right folks on the phone to do that. As I said, I'm John Lay. I'm the lead analyst and CEO and founder of Talented Learning. We're now in our 8th year of being bloggers, podcasters, putting on public webinars and consulting, all helping LMS buyers buy better. I spend all my time looking at demonstrations. I view literally hundreds of hours of demonstrations in any given year through sales opportunities, plus just in our general research of going solution by solution. And so my background is basically perfectly aligned with today's webinar to tell you about what we've been seeing. But just as from an expert standpoint, we also have Tamer today. And Tamer's awesome. He's on at least his second company now in learning tech that he's founded, a successful company. He is also on the front lines of buying and selling all the time. And his current organization, Authentic Learning Labs, is kind of like the 3M of the learning world. Is they don't make learning management systems, they just make it better. So Tamer gets to see all different kinds of systems also. And because of that, that's why you're here today, Tamer, to bring your expert opinion and share what you've been seeing on the front line. So between the two of us, we'll try to orient you with what's going on. So Tamer, thanks again for joining us.
My pleasure, John. Thank you.
All right. So what are we going to do today? There's been change in the last 3 years or last 2.5 years because of COVID and the pandemic, of course. But there's also the change in the industry as a whole. Just in the last 3 years, we've added about another 250 learning systems to the now about 1,000 learning systems that are available around the world. And so what we're going to talk about is what's happening from a market standpoint to help set the features. And then what are the top 10 features? What are they? Why is it important to know it? What are some examples? Give us some for instances. That's what we're going to cover today and try to really paint the picture for you, as well as give you some future predictions on those same feature sets as we go forward. We got the chat turned on. So thanks everybody for tuning in and saying where you're from: Northern Virginia, Switzerland, Chicago, Calgary, Austria, and outstanding all around the world. Norway, London, Seattle, Orlando, Florida. Just love to have a good global audience like this. So please chat all the way through the presentation today, and we'll answer your questions as we go through. Another Zurich, another Toronto, Estonia. Man, outstanding. So I already introduced Talented Learning. Basically, we help learning systems buyers buy better by providing research and education. But you may not be familiar with Authentic as an organization, and you should be. So Tamer, give us the quick overview on Authentic Learning Labs and how you're the 3M of our industry.
We can only wish. Well, we started Authentic Learning Labs really because we saw some problems in the industry, and we continue to see them. And we see that there are certain areas that we think there are very good platforms out there. So the problems are not there. It's that the experiences are weak. There's poor engagement. lack of data and insightful data, and it's still somewhat labor intensive and time intensive to create courses and content. So we feel like we try to stay away from calling ourselves middleware, but we are a technical and software company that offers the services too. And our platforms are really trying to address those issues and seamlessly integrating into the platforms that we work with. So we play friendly and neutral. We consider ourselves Switzerland to the platforms out there and the LMS providers, and we work with them. And the work we do is standards-based, either learning standards-based and or internet standards-based. And we do a considerable amount of services and consulting as part of that as well. So our work is usually 4 to 5 months long or longer, and we get involved in high-profile, mission-critical learning work.
Right. Well, thanks. Go back to where I started the thing that most organizations are 3 to 5 years into their LMS. And even when they want to switch, a lot of times it takes a year or 2 or 3 until you get internal approvals and budget approvals and executive approvals to move something like that forward. And so Tamer's group basically is the stopgap. If you can't get off it, then you might as well improve it while it's there. And so they've been providing lots of services for that. So as we get going here, what is the feature that you've heard about, the buzz about, that you don't have in your current LMS? Anybody has any insights on that as we get going? Go ahead and drop that in there right now. But I hear it every day, like, oh, my LMS is all right, but I don't have blah, 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 gamification or social, neither of which we're going to talk about today, as it turns out. So let's start off with number one, and we'll head on down, audience. Paycor integration. Oh, that's a good one. KPI-based learning, Tamer. Oh, I tell you what, that is, we're gonna hit that in a second. Seamless CRM integration. Salesforce integration, personalization. All right, Tamer. It's almost like we had some insight creating this presentation. Better engagement features. Okay, so let's talk about use case specialization. So I mentioned, audience, Tamer, that there's 1,000 learning systems out there, and people ask me all the time, like, really? Aren't all LMSs the same? Don't they all do the same thing? Well, sure. All LMSs or learning systems manage learners and they manage content and the interrelationship between the two. That part is true. How they do it, how deep they do it, who they do it for, in what industries, in what use case, in what countries or region, well, that's all different. What services they provide, how deep their functionalities are, how their functionality works together. Those are all differentiators across these different learning systems. And what ends up happening, or what's happened in the last 5 years, last 7 years now, is that we've went from this trend of LMS providers, learning system providers, being generalists to being specialists. And what that ended up doing is, from the functional use cases, the services that these vendors provide, the naming, the nomenclature, the technology within it, the integrations that they support, Salesforce, Paycor, the support that they provide, the timing of the support that they provide, how they license the software, all those things are different and specialized based on use case. And the core use cases that we see right now are employees, customers, channel partners, training providers, continuing education providers, associations, and academia. And in each one of those sectors, the innovation is happening. And the organizations that are in those sectors and specialize are developing things that aren't really relevant and aren't really relevant to those other use cases. And that's where the innovation is. And that's why buyers want to find the specialist LMS. So we just wanted to set the stage there, because a lot of these features, as we go through, are going to be more relevant to some of these use cases other than others, because no feature is relevant to everybody. And so for buyers, it's really important to understand how you're going to be using it, who your learning audiences are, and articulate that really well, and use that as the lens to look at the industry and say, okay, who does this all the time? You just don't want an LMS to say, oh, we can do everything. You want who can do it exactly the way I want, or doing exactly what I want. So that's audience use case specialization happening at a level unseen before. But Tamer, I thought you could probably bring it to light by, one of the main use cases is you do a lot of your work in associations and continuing education and training for a business. And, a lot of organizations have like an HR talent LMS for their employees, and then they try to make it work for something like that. To bring this concept home, can you give us a couple, for instances, what would be non-relevant functionality in that case, or, things that are missing in your experience if you're trying to use like an HR LMS
For sure. What
that?
we see, I mean, this is a normal maturation process, right? That our industry, and this is a great thing for us as participants and members of the community, is that our industry is specialized now, and things are getting more exposed in terms of needs. And what we see is in the regards of, let's say, professional education or a corporate training organization has much more obligation to train outside of just the company itself, is when you're extending your outlook to participants outside your normal firewall or your audience of employees, the needs become different, and you need to organize them differently. For example, when we're talking about organizations that are serving other audiences, whether they're customers or they're in the healthcare space, they're medical teaching programs, or if it's a manufacturer of a product like a bulldozer, they need to appease and deliver to distributors or partners. In those cases, those people need access to the site. So that's one. You need to seamlessly make that experience clean for them. They need to have almost their own sub hubs to come in and participate. So if I'm a big in Chicago, Illinois, if I'm a big participant and provider for a particular bulldozer company, I may require and demand that I have my own sub portal and have my own content and track my own users. These are not normal, what we would say as standard default features of a standard LMS, but they're certainly now becoming more and more important as people start extending their reach, especially these audiences where we're talking about professional education, corporate training, customer training programs, or extended enterprise. Those are all, even though they're different industries, they all have that same need where you have a bunch of people in different hierarchies, but they're all stakeholders. They're not just employees. That also has something to do with aesthetics. You can't just dump up content to people when they have choices, especially with these customers. They can go somewhere else. So you have to also have it appealing and attractive in terms of the user experience.
All right. Well, that's one of probably about 1,000 different examples of this. And last little note on this, I told you that I help hundreds of organizations buy a learning management system. What I found is when buyers are given the opportunity to evaluate a generalist versus a specialist, especially the generalists that are really well known, I would say the percentage of time they buy a specialist is in the 90s with my client base. So that's what people are buying. So we'll leave that and get into now start driving down into the features. So I've been following LMSs forever. And forever, when you wanted to start personalizing or adapt to the learning experience, there wasn't a whole lot of ways to do it. For a lot of years, all employees basically got the same view. When they logged in, this is the employee view of the learning management system. And then over time, maybe things evolved a little bit. You could start doing, well, if you have this job, or you have this role, or you're from this organization, or even maybe from this region or country, well, then either you maybe have more or less functionality or more or less access to content or more or less assigned content based on those rules. But it was pretty cut and dry, 3 or 4 criteria. Now it's thousands of criteria. Now it can be anything that drives that personalized learning experience. What does that mean? Well, if we go to that bulldozer example that Tamer was talking about, it's logging in and only seeing content because of your role at that dealer and what your dealer is authorized to even resell or has the ability to resell limits, for example, what your catalog might be or what your content would be. And so all kinds of things beyond those 4. And so it can be anything that's happening outside of the systems, things in CRM, things in custom databases, things in just their customer service or customer platforms, or who's going to a web show, who's going to stop and buy your booth, who's downloading what. All of those can be features that drive the personalized adaptive experience. And what we found and what buyers and practitioners found is the more personalized, the more adaptive it is, the better the learning, the quicker the learning happens. So the quicker time to competency And all of that is measurable and can be used to move not only the individual and their career forward, but just as importantly, maybe more importantly, depending on who's looking at it, to move your organization and your company forward. And so that's what personalized adaptive is right now. And so probably one of the most exciting things is that now you can almost have like 1,000 different LMSs for 1,000 different users. And you can have that right now. And all that happens automatically based on these applications being able to manage that complexity of the data coming in and then what they do with that particular data. But Tamer, a question I get all the time on this when I talk about adaptive and personalize is, do I mean like the user interface? Because that was the example I gave, the user interface, or does it mean the content itself, or even inside the content, or all three? What's your perspective on that? How deep can this personalization get?
Well, I think all three is possible. I mean, it would drive us nuts 10 years ago when people would say, just give us the Amazon experience, right? It's very difficult for a provider, and especially in the learning space. Hopefully I assume some of the people on this webinar are from platform companies. I'm sure you hear this is right. We just want Amazon for our industry. We're fish tank company. We want to be the Amazon of fish tanks. So that's difficult, right? And it requires a significant amount of tech muscle, but also data to start making those predictions and recommendations. I think we're getting to that point where all the technology is there for us to get that a little bit more consumer friendly and cost effective. So we're seeing that more and more at the baseline. Having content and being able to be tagged and organized in a way, it's categorized content, and then knowing something about people and what they're doing is allowing learning platforms to recommend, promote content, and bring up or boil down content based on the person and their profile. Fancier things will happen where if some activity drives that recommendation, and now we're seeing even fancier things where predictive analytics is coming in, where people are taking the data that someone's performing in an assessment, like a detailed assessment, especially for pre-licensure or something like insurance certification, things like that. They're taking that data, analyzing it, understanding who are top performers, weak performers, and in between, and starting making recommendations to that person on their pace of study, on what they should be studying, the topics, things like that. So those are, when we hear the Amazon thing now, it's much more, we direct them to what is possible now, which is probably much more effective than just promoting a product because other people like you bought this, right? That's what they think about when Amazon. But yeah, if you can actually participate in an assessment and then get a recommendation based on, the assessments get thousands of people using it, there's a very valuable data that can help me learn better and get topical recommendations on what I can do better. So that's where I think it's going. And then also on the content side, although we don't see it as much, we hear rumblings of that where the content itself adjusts. And I think that's the next side of it is that, where we have seen it, it is possible now is to dynamically adjust content based on someone's preferences for language, for accessibility because they have disabled users. Or now I think in the future will be a small, medium, large type content based on their purchases or their preferences, and then gearing that to them based on those preferences. So yeah, a lot of that's all possible. So I would say all three.
Yeah, exciting. All right, folks. So why don't you go ahead and enter in the chat, how adaptive is your LMS? Like what's the most unique data source or thing that you're using to alter the user experience or the content? Go ahead and enter that in and we'll answer a couple questions while you're doing that. So Michelle's asking about who's the best for learning as well as sales enablement. What are the best platforms? Well, that's a big question. How about we follow up with that afterwards, Michelle, and we'll help you out there. There's depending on what you're trying to do, like all things, we'll start narrowing down on that use case and help you find that. But there's quite a few that are good with that, and they bring in the capability to do a lot of things that we're going to talk about here in just a little bit. I don't want to give it away, but ways that you could test and basically test the competence and have them demonstrate the competence of your sales and manage that process. So that part's pretty exciting. And there's certainly some systems that do that better. Steve, we asking if we're going to address user generated content. Not so much in this particular one, other than that, as we were talking, as Tamer was talking about, creating these sub portals, for example, for dealers or for resellers or partners, the ability to have them create and put their content up. But certainly, user generated content. I probably should have started this at the beginning of the presentation to say that there is probably about 100 feature sets that could be on this list. So we started off with about 20 and got down to this 10. So there's certainly some that could probably arguably on there. And finally, Jose, when you say talking about learners where they are, basically what that means is where they are conceptually. So where they are in their career, where they are in their relationship with your company, where they are as an employee, all those things, all those data points is a way to meet them with the learning they need at the time that they need it to be most useful. It also could possibly mean that we'll talk about in a little bit of taking the learning out of the LMS. And so finally, just look at some of the answers here on this adaptive. It's nice to see everybody meeting each other here. Great. Exporting data Tableau records is a way. Using LTI content and way to do that. Jennifer saying hi, Tamer.
Hi, Jennifer.
And Solve here is extracting data in the corporate search engine.
Yeah, that's a cool example.
Yeah, because perhaps a course is the answer to what you were searching for. And this way we capture people who haven't already decided what they decide that the training is the answer for them. Yeah, pretty slick.
That's just, you have to figure out the authentication or how do you launch them. But that's a great example. I love that example. Thank you.
Philip, thanks for responding. It is an adaptive, alas. That's a great comment. I told you some people would be jealous. All right, let's get on to the next one here. Thanks everybody
for
the interactivity here.
Hopefully I pronounced Solve's name correctly.
I know, Solve. I'm going with Solve.
Hopefully you can put it in the chat.
If it's not, maybe it's Solve. Perhaps. Who knows? All right, so that's the next one. 3, intra LMS authoring. This is cool. And 20 years ago, there was no such concept of this. Perhaps maybe you might author assessments. Perhaps you might be able to author surveys inside your LMS. But all the other content was coming from somewhere else. And but that's changed. Tamer, tell us what intra LMS authoring is, what it means, and why it's important.
Yeah,
I guess in how it's different than
for sure. Yeah, no, that's very true. This is an interesting movement we see, is that people are not just resting on what we think is like a Coke and Pepsi world. What we see in our learning industry, which what I mean by that is Articulate and Captivate, kind of dominating that. With apologies to other learning providers, I'm sure there are other very good authoring tools. It's just like sodas, right? There are other good sodas that we now start drinking now these days. But the dominant forces in authoring, and what we see, the majority of content that we handle or migrate or transfer, is one of those two. And so what we're seeing now is people are wanting to develop new experiences. We're a part of that, where we work with clients in building out new layouts in our layout engine. But this is something that's coming into more platforms, especially the specialized platforms that may serve certain specific needs, where someone wants to assemble content that might be built in various tools, audio and video clips, documents, maybe even incorporate, some types of features that are not even possible in Articulate, maybe some live interaction of human elements into a learning experience. And this is more and more a place where I think providers, LMS platforms, can leverage and build more value. So we certainly see it. And especially in organizations that are trying to do larger scale courses, and courses that are a little bit more than just, hey, this is a 2-hour sitting time and you need to complete it. It's a compliance course. Those will still exist. Those are obviously of value. These are more courses, I would say, of depth. They probably cross a lot more time, more sitting time. If you would measure it as more than a week worth of time in there, there might be an element of interaction with the instructor and or peers as well. So yeah, it's definitely there, and we see it a lot more.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So we do a lot of work at Talented Learning with organizations that are training their extended enterprise, so customers or partners or associations. Pretty much those 3 groups are the main extended enterprise use cases. And what we found is in those use cases, almost 100% of the content that they're delivering is their own intellectual property, their own special sauce. So there's nowhere to go off the shelf and find this content and put it in to their LMS. They need to create this content. But it also turns out that's very different than employee learning departments. Employee learning departments, can source content from a lot of different places. Excel content is already out there. Compliance content is already out there. And so much less, only the most important content perhaps is custom authored, either in a third-party authoring tool or perhaps in the LMS. But with the extended enterprise, everything needs to be authored. And so, and the professionals in those organizations aren't necessarily from the HR training space. So they're not necessarily familiar with Captivate or Articulate. So for buyers, the ability to author the content within the LMS, get the horsepower that Tamer was talking about with different types and assembling that and reusing that and using it as a content system really blends the line between where the LMS starts and where the content stops. And it's almost impossible to see. And so there's a lot of advantages from administrators, content authors, and learners to all have a more seamless experience. And so we see this is an important feature set and something that people really use it as a critical differentiator between what systems they buy and what systems they don't buy, as it turns out.
That's a great point, John.
So interesting stuff. Now, I love interactive video. Let's talk about this. If you guys are just showing video on YouTube with an embed code, that's so pre-pandemic, Tamer. That is pre-pandemic.
It's an interesting label, right? Pre-pandemic.
Pre-pandemic. I mean, that might have been all right back in 2019, but not anymore. So there's a lot of advances in online learning, of course, because of the nature of the last 2 years and what that's forced organizations to do. We'll get into more of those advancements and how they manifested themselves. But one of the manifestations, without a doubt, is in how an LMS can handle video and the learner experience in video, and how they can make that not just a one-way, but turning it into a two-way process that you can interact with that video in a variety of ways, from maybe taking assessments or being able to search the video or doing a variety of things. Part of Authentic suite of products is kind of a plugin that helps you do this better and automatically. And so, Tamer, why don't you kind of flesh out what I'm missing here, or what's the most important things here from this interactive video, and maybe a for instance of how you see this being used.
Sounds good. And we can move to the next slide, and maybe that'll make people focus more on the slide than what I'm going to say. But we were jealous, to be candid, of how much learning happens on a platform like YouTube. I'm sure all of you have maybe possibly searched for something that you wanted to learn, maybe fix a car issue, some domestic issue with a washer and dryer, or even just learn a new skill. YouTube is an amazing source for learning and content. And we see that the dramatic change in how people are learning now, where a lot of activities happening on a Zoom like this, and Zoom is becoming a verb almost, right, or a noun, that we have to solve those problems and make, as we're maturing the content in general. Learning happened to where it was moving almost the book paradigm onto the web, and we use that phrase, right, as a page turner content. Video, for most part, has been what we would consider a page turner. It's a video, it's static video, but it could be much more. And we built Shuttle, which is our video platform, to address some of those capabilities. We didn't want to dramatically change the experience from what people are used to on YouTube, but cautiously insert features and functions that would improve the learning and the experience. For example, interactivity in the video. So you're not just sitting there with your eyeballs glued to the screen, possibly distracted from everything else around you, alerts, messages, Microsoft Teams alerts, Slack alerts, WhatsApp, Telegram, whatever is in our daily noise of activity, but to immerse the learning, provide AI-generated transcripts so that we basically help the participant hear it. We hear this a lot. A lot of people who are maybe whatever the default language is that's being delivered, they're not the traditional language that's being delivered, and they would like to see their transcription. So this is one way of doing it. We hear a lot in North America of non-native English speakers wanting to see a transcript so they can follow along. knowing something about the speakers, taking quizzes within the video, knowing what people are interacting with it. We try to stay away from the jargon, but everything that we're doing is also being tracked. So the participant who's doing these things on the video is also being tracked through XAPI, and that pours into a database, and it enriches our analytics. So we know what people are doing within the video. Through heat maps, we know what video portions they're concentrating on. We know where they're fast forwarding and rewinding and all that. So we provide a snapshot of people's activities, much more than just, hey, we just put up the best webinar series, our recordings for the last year. That was the traditional model, right? Now we can do a lot more. And that's not to say those things have no value. It's that now we can say, you're not just plopping up a video, but we're trying to put up a video experience, a learning experience, which is different, right? Or hopefully different when we're introducing these items. So it's really key there.
Yeah, cool stuff. When I think of interactive video, I always think about the learner and the learner experience, and for sure that's important. But a lot of what you said is, the organizational benefits of, actually seeing how these videos are performing singularly or with multiple groups of users or across your whole library, and getting analytics and data to help you make smarter decisions on updating and creating new videos in the future. So that part of making it more measurable and accountable for the organization is also a pretty big benefit. And just to pile on in your transcript. So in some tools you can upload a transcript, but then you got to get that transcript from somewhere and generally pay for it. And, you upload it and then it's still just kind of there. It doesn't do anything really. What's neat that I see in the interactive videos is the ability to, like, I could just do a control find and look for a particular term, and I could find it in the transcript and just click on it. And then it goes to the video, the spot in the video where that word is. And so it's a super clean way that you can dig into an hour-long video and only find the 30 seconds that matter to you based on that smart, intelligent AI transcription, and then being able to go to it. So all those things are really cool, and it makes it a lot different than just playing a video, and it gets a lot more money out of your video, since even video is cheaper now in 2022 than it was 5 years ago because of really all the advances, with cell phone and digital video. It's still expensive and it still takes a lot to do. And so getting more out of it and more benefit and more value out of it certainly is key for sure. Okay, moving on. Hybrid management. So hybrid's a loaded term, Tamer. We just we just had a series of presentations here with a client, and the client wanted hybrid, and all 4 vendors that came in needed a definition of hybrid, not because they didn't know what hybrid is, but because there's a lot of definitions of what hybrid could mean. And essentially, when people talk about hybrid learning, they really generally mean 2 main things: either hybrid, meaning blended in the sense that you could have a training plan that has live instructor-led components, virtual-led components, and self-paced components that are all mixed together across a plan or across a continuum. And that is a definition of hybrid. But another definition of hybrid is doing 2 at the same time. So if we were teaching this class live to an audience that was here in Pennsylvania, and at the same time doing it on Zoom. In either case, it takes a sophisticated and a substantial amount of functionality to be able to do this well from a learning system. And of course, because of the pandemic, this has been one of the feature sets that's had the most research, development, innovation in usage over the last 2.5 years out of anything. So Tamer, why don't you pile on? You're up close and personal here with hybrid learning and blended learning. What else should we know?
Yeah, it's again, I think you phrased it, the post-pandemic world. I think one thing we all have to acknowledge and realize is that we have to add more human elements to the e-learning, and e-learning was somewhat cold, somewhat sci-fi, and that people were introduced to a technology that was resting on a server somewhere. You went to a URL and you downloaded content and you took it. I think we can't do that anymore as more and more people are participating online. The expectation is that human elements are part of that. And I think what we're seeing is not as much wow technology as how much more and more people are gravitating towards introducing human elements. Those could be as easy as the discussion board assignments and interacting with the instructor, converting a lot more. We have clients that were demonstratively instructor-led significant businesses, million-dollar businesses that are now moving completely online, or a hybrid model where it's part self-paced, part live, and intermingled throughout the year, not just a 2-day training session somewhere in the world. And with that, I think that the providers that we're seeing, they're doing some cool things they're marrying all those things, those features and functions. They might not be the providers of all that. For example, who's going to compete with a Zoom right now or a GoToMeeting? Not many people would be interested to jump into that competition. I wouldn't recommend it, right? But what you could do is integrate with these. Most of these platforms and providers are really working very well with us to create APIs and integration capabilities to put their capabilities within solutions. And I think that's a real key thing is integrating these experiences. This is, providing, and where I think the learning platforms are providing value is marrying all this together, right? So you have providers that are providing the best-in-class capabilities like this live capability or a virtual classroom, hands-on virtual experience. But what can you do to bring all these together? Maybe a singular gradebook, singular interface that everybody's jumping off. Those are things that we're seeing. We're also participating in that. We're creating those experiences. And I think that's the cool part. The tools are out there, but to bring them together and orchestrate them into one experience where the learners say, okay, I got this. I'm going to go in through this. I've got 18 weeks. I've got to go through this course. I'm going to interact with some of my peers. I post my exercises. It should be all intuitive and should be easy, unencumbered.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And all of that on the back end to make all that happen is advancement, innovation.
Yeah,
it's tough.
I agree.
Most LMSs, they can put up one course or one VILT, but it's hard when your program becomes more expansive, which a lot of the hybrid ones are, for sure. Got some good chatting going on. John here saying that discussion boards are also adaptive ready using AI, certainly to bring that in. We're going to talk a little bit more about AI in a second, John. So we'll table the rest of our comment on that. All right, let's keep going. How are we doing on time? Oh man, we got to get going, Tamer. This always happens to us. Let's start off at hands-on, or keep going with hands-on activities. Now, I like hands-on activities, and so if you think about learning as a process in your organization, many of you may resemble this remark that you're pushing information. You're pushing, you're teaching, and you're pushing information a lot of times, but before you actually need it. But how much do you do that next step of the demonstration of your competence? And that demonstration could be everything from driving that bulldozer that we were talking about, to fixing the engine, to troubleshooting it, with physical machines, all the way to, how a car salesman or any salesperson may introduce the product, the features, the benefits, the walk around, to, how a retail employee, can greet customers, or how they put on their uniform or wear their all those are things that organizations train to, and they want their different learners to do. And previously it was always just about telling them to do it and making them aware, where now there's been this shift to demonstrate. But the ability to manage that from an LMS standpoint, once again, is tricky, and it's advanced, and it's not common to manage these hands-on activities. And these hands-on activities could be solo, meaning that maybe I record myself doing something and I just upload it, either for the instructor or a reviewer or even peers in a cohort to comment on and grade. Or it could be a situation where an instructor or a reviewer is sitting there with a rubric and watching me go step by step as I perform, and checking off on yes, no, or 1 through 5, or adding comments on how I actually perform that. And all of that is a part of the learning experience, or a part of the learning plan, a part of the criteria for completion. So those are, in a nutshell, what at a high level, what a hands-on activity are and what they're used for. How about some for instances, Tamer? Anything you want to add on to that? Did I capture that right? Is there anything I'm missing there from a feature standpoint? And what are some good for instances of this?
Well, that's great. I completely agree. And as you were speaking, I noted some of the dialogue about, how quickly is, VR is one way, right? And I agree. I infer from what you're commenting is that, that it is it is, an advanced technology. The cost is probably at a point where not everyone could approach it just like an authoring tool could be. But VR is one way, and then that's one where we've seen some advanced companies doing virtual reality for certain things and amassing the data and then analyzing performance. Another way is just hands-on clinics. We do see that much more practically, in that we've supported clients that are doing clinics where a participant is performing an activity, for example, assembly, and they're noted by an instructor. That instructor is using a score sheet. That score sheet is scannable or has a QR code or some way to submit an ID to the LMS. The LMS is correspondingly doing what an LMS typically does, but is understanding that learning product in a way that normally the other LMSs haven't done, and that's really to support that kind of hands-on activity. For the participant, they do what they're doing. The instructor is scoring them on some type of rubric that gets fed into the LMS and scored as an activity. That is something that we're seeing more and more than VR. Not to say and discount that VR has a lot less value. It's just, I think, still there probably is a technical mystique to it that people are averse to it, and maybe just the marketing and exposure to it. Probably costs are somewhat, unknown for some of those products. So I see that a lot, and then I think the other side of it is just the bubble sheet stuff is continuing. Is that we're working with clients that are still doing the bubble sheet, sending certification exams all around the world, but that stuff still is working. We've worked to build solutions for organizations that want to bring that back into the LMS, because the LMS is the central record. That's another trend, right? Is that the LMS should serve and centralize all that experience, and that is how they're doing it.
All right, great points. We got a thriving chat session going here.
Yes.
In parallel. Solve from where are you from? Norway, I think. You had it there before, but now I don't see it. You mentioned that you're using AR more than VR for the training purposes as work support. As we continue, feel free to expand on that a little bit in the chat on why you use one versus the other. That'd be interesting to see. We have a lot of, and certainly the competency in this demonstration part, we have a comment from John just about how important that is in academic circles. And that's true. That's where it all started, was in the academic circles. And not only this hands-on base and this competency base, but a lot of things are coming, from the academic into the corporate world. So the best of these learning technologies are making the migration into corporate learning. And some of the things are like that intra-LMS authoring and a few other things that are coming in competency-based assessments like this. So we're seeing a convergence of that academic and the corporate world, which is something that we hadn't seen.
Yeah, one thing I failed to mention is, and I should, because a person I respect is on here that is probably using that more and more, is like simulation training more and more in higher expense, but in more complex scenario-based, choice-based driven content. That's something else that we see more and more of, that we saw a plateau for a while, but now we're seeing an increase of that as well.
Steve makes a comment about the metaverse.
We knew it would happen.
That's still future for me. I don't know if you got any comments on that. For me, I haven't seen that yet, other than not so much yet. So.
Yeah, as someone who's very cautious about their age right now, I was told that Facebook is no longer cool, so I am not talking about anything Facebook. But I have to. I guess this is something that's going to have to happen, and companies are moving towards adopting some aspect of a metaverse strategy. I don't know enough to make an intelligent comment on that one.
All right, we'll leave it then, since we know enough about other stuff.
Well,
so we think. So we think anyway. So we think. All right. I think we got this in the wrong spot here. Did we do that? Oh, is your organization using hands-on right now? Any hands-on activities? Any demonstration of competence? Any VR or AR type things? Any of these checklists? If you want to put an example or for instance to help flesh this out for everybody, I'll bring them up here in just a second if we have enough time. So go ahead and add that into the chat as we move on to our next one here, and the in the flow of work. And so this is becoming more and more important of Tamer, you've already mentioned here about the QR codes and using those as a way to bring learning, when you're out in the field or in different places or in competency assessments, but also that integration in with Slack and Teams is probably the most, the most common instance of the in the flow of work. So it's the sharing of content on a regular basis to Slack channels, perhaps, as well as notifications about daily learning or different learning opportunities. So it's tying those two together. Probably in a perfect world, you'll see the LMS incorporate more and more of those technologies just intra. But as it is right now, using that and linking out to these corporate communication tools seems to be pretty popular and in vogue, and a requirement that surfaces. And not everybody can do this. It's for both of these, Teams and Slack. It's a real differentiator who's integrating into that. But probably a more important one is that the concept of the in-app learning of pushing learning to where the learner is, in this case, physically where they're at. Do you have any comments on that, how you're seeing that on a mobile app basis or inside actual software applications, or how this learning is out of the LMS?
Yeah, I think this is another place where the traditional LMS can leverage its strength, but interact with something in between. These tools, we've had a cafeteria model of learning in many ways. Is that people, you get in line, you take your courses, and then you get out. And as you mentioned here in the flow of the work, and people were mentioning that in the chat, is we have to go where the learners are. And predominantly, the majority of our days are probably spent in these tools, right? Slack or just Teams and collaboration. And if we're smart about where we're trying to target our participants, we should put it there. It may not be everything, especially internally focused content. And these tools make it easy for you to do that. They have capabilities, and there are integration capabilities that you can have a singular launch or activity. I think the fancier stuff happens when you can make it condition-based or event-based based on activity in the CRM. Salesforce performance, customer service, their Zendesk numbers are dipping, or your customer service, whatever software you use. It's dipping, or there's a poor performer, trigger a Slack notification or a Teams notification where someone could take content. You already know the data on that, but placing it in a place of work, in the flow of work, is much more effective. These tools can also take another route, is they can become learning tools as well, is that people also have good dialogues in them, and they could become a part of a course. So people are thinking about it in one way, but they should also look at it in a way is that these are interactive elements that they're already used to. You don't have to introduce anything else. Put them into a course. And that's something that we can do very easily.
Wow, great. Probably the last thing of that is you can identify, pile on that, you can identify experts in your community.
That's true.
The people that are then, responding and commenting on these channels, allow you to identify them and then bring them and their conversations into the learning content as you identify high performers inside your organization. So a lot of cool benefits from doing that. One of the comments is like, who's good at this? I think a lot of, not a lot, but more and more productized integrations, meaning that you can just turn it on, put in your code and turn it on, versus building anything custom exists out there. Probably, a lot of different type of companies that you see do that, from like the Matrix LMS or Docebo or Cornerstone or Skilljar, community brands inside their crowd wisdom would all be examples of organizations that would do this type of thing. That's becoming more. 5 years ago, I couldn't even name one, but now it's you're seeing more and more of that from a productized integration standpoint. So what's next? Well, assessments. We already talked about some of the hands-on assessments part, but assessments are another area in LMSs that have just, exploded, Tamer. Absolutely exploded in what can be done. So historically, what can you do? LMSs can always create and launch assessments. It's the only authoring capability that existed 20 years ago in LMSs, was to create that. And generally, you can create your true, false, your multiple choice, your multiple select. Sometimes a clickable graphic would be features that you see in virtually every LMS in the world, all 1,000 of them. And that gets you so far. That it gets you so far, but not very far. certification grade assessments are taking it to the next level of really making sure, once again, about this demonstration of competence and of tying competency to assessment to actual certifications. But another area of expertise, boy, Tamer, all your areas of expertise are showing up here today. Tell us about what that next level of certification brings. I gave the baseline. What's next? What's this mean?
Well, we knew this from the start with e-learning even 10, 15 years ago. We knew that assessment was working and has worked. The drill and practice concepts, if you look at the studies, things are working. And in terms of technology-wise, it was like John said, you mentioned, John, that many of the providers were able to deliver an exam. But I think the fancier needs and the advanced needs are here where basically, specialization again, where organizations are doing advanced testing. So the settings are different. The components of an exam, there are hierarchies of the bodies of knowledge. You have to segment the exam to see how people score in different levels, handling that, and then security in terms of now with a virtual world, either integrating or providing some kind of virtual proctor or verifying identity of the person. In many states, you can deliver, especially high profile assessments and certifications, you can deliver them online, but you have to validate the person's identity. You have to check with them, and with that, with people moving more and more online, right, is watching their performance during the live sessions, not just saying, okay, this person took it, but what were they doing through the whole thing? Monitoring infringement issues. These are all the capabilities that we're seeing with the assessment engines. And then obviously the data itself, benchmarking against peers, knowing what everybody responded to every question, and then like we mentioned earlier, taking that and feeding it into the analytics systems, and we do this ourselves as well, is to predict performance and also marry performance and show it against all other participants. And then also, with some of the groups that we're doing, like with healthcare, especially teaching programs, resident programs around the world, they break up their residents like program years. So if it's like in college, you have freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. They do similar. They call them program year participants or PGYs. And when I'm a first year program participant, let's say for neurosurgery or orthopedics, I want to be compared to my peers. I'm not just trying to score, right? There's benchmarking that needs to be done. So these are all the advanced capabilities organizations are doing on top of all this other metadata like confidence. How confident am I answering this question? I'm not just answering A, B, C, D. I'm answering how confident I am. And looking at that data, we work with our partner, Crowd Wisdom. They're represented on this call. Welcome here. Is that seeing that data and you aggregate it, it starts getting really cool. Or asking questions to the instructor, you start seeing trends. So these are things that we're doing and working out really well. And it's a piece of the e-learning puzzle that I think a lot of people will not question because of its efficacy.
I think you started off talking about those bodies of knowledge. I think the last thing that people are using these for is for test preparation. To be able to, with the different bodies of knowledge of what you're going to need to pass your LSATs or any other, high stakes certification to help expose you to the questions, rotate those questions through, and you take them from low, medium to high confidence until you know that you know them cold, and eventually through the progression of these and questions of the day and studying, you get to a point that you're ready, you're competent to pass those exams. So we see, a lot of advancements in helping people study and creating a plan for them to study for those through the assessment engine. All of that is just light years beyond, a multiple guess question for sure.
Yeah, we have, that's a great point, John. Sorry to interrupt. I was just going to add to that is that, to your point, we have clients that are using this as a marketing approach because their programs are so successful in preparing participants for an exam, a career event, whether it's a certification or a board or a license, or just getting a skill set. They're so successful in putting someone through a process that they even label the exams as such, like, a guarantee exam. If you score a certain amount on this exam, we can guarantee a certain amount of performance. And it's very effective, especially if they're going through, in learning, we're always having a struggle of having the participant behave the way we want. But in these things, exams specifically, it's a lot easier to do that if you do have something at the end of the tunnel like that.
Absolutely. All right, 5 minutes to go, folks. We're going to be sending the recording, so don't worry. As we wrap this up here, we'll follow up. I want to talk about artificial intelligence. You just can't throw a stone in this industry without hitting an LMS that says they're using AI. And what I've found from more machine learning, and what I've found from my experience, is that it's super easy to exaggerate AI and really difficult to demonstrate AI working. So it's one of those things that I think a lot of vendors take a lot of creative liberty with. But what I've seen is that AI is all over the place. What we saw today on the AI on the automatic transcriptions of the video or the voiceovers, we also see things like automatic tagging of content. So instead of manually tagging, bringing it in, it analyzes it and says these are the 10 tags on it. We see it a lot with LXP providers with the content recommendations based on past content, consumption habits, and things like that to recommend what the next piece of content is based on what you've done, plus everybody else in your job role that's done the same things. And you can start getting fancier and fancier things like that to get the right skill assignments, the right tagging assignments, even support bots being driven by AI. That's whole list. No LMS has all of this, as it turns out, but these are the different things that are pushing this technology inside the industry. And generally what it does is it makes everything faster, more accurate, and allows you to see trends that you wouldn't normally be able to see. The second one, or the 10th one that we want to talk about, is this concept of a headless LMS. And a headless LMS is when a company has their own front end and wants to use the learning management system. It used to be something that you'd see once in a dog's age, but now it's not. Now it's something that you see all the time, and the ability to use the LMS for content delivery and for reporting and notifications and content management and administration and learner management and all the things that we've talked about today, but you're feeding that and information into a different system for the end user experience. We've seen it a lot historically with associations and association management systems that had the front end e-commerce system with back end LMSs, but now it's moving to more, any organization that's really on the high end, that's spending 7 figures on their learning environment. This is becoming more and more of a popular thing. But we wouldn't just leave it at 10 because that wouldn't be fair. We wanted to have 11, even if we rushed through it. And analytics and visualizations is the next one. Tamer, tell us about analytics and visualization in 3 minutes or less. What the innovation has happened in the industry.
Well, we developed Songbird, which is our learning analytics suite, because we wanted to equip the people on this call with strategic arsenal to be in discussions that we feel we were deserving of be a part of, strategy discussions, business impact discussions, and we felt like somewhat our data was a soft score. A lot of performance was just completions, just SAT scores on surveys. So we took what was already on the web in terms of what we saw in analytics, and we just put it on the lens, using the lens of learning. So we built a series of dashboards and continue to build more, and then we'll build client-specific ones. I think there's a small video of one, just a simple one there, where you could see, just a high-level performance of enrollments and completions and the completion percentage. Allowing you to segment, the content that you see on the screen. The other one is assessment scores, pre and post assessment scores. It's probably a little bit small on your screen right now, but essentially these are real data points, so we can't show you the actual client. But in this case, is a first attempt score in the green or circle, and then on the right is the far last attempt and the delta in between. So we're able to take and visualize data that's already in rows and rows of spreadsheets that the LMS providers do very well. But what we saw was that they weren't doing the insight type of data that we thought we could do using visualization tools. So we did not invent these charts. We didn't invent how to put these things in tables, but we're trying to put a learning expertise to these views. So we create them so our clients don't have to create them, and get the feeds from all the sources of data that it creates. So the advancing clients are taking these and not just using the data from the LMS, but they're looking at CRM, data from their webinar platform, their LXP and putting it into one place. So I know we're up at time, so I just want to be aware of that.
We're up. I think that the last pile on visualizations is everybody wants dashboards. Everybody wants to be able to look at the data, but there's a gap between taking the data and getting the useful dashboard. And so what we see the best organizations right now are making dashboard visualizations for all their different types of users to really get into the data. I mean, it's one thing to do a test item analysis, but who has time or the brains to scan through 20,000 rows of data and come up with any trends like that? And so the key here is taking the data that's already there and making it useful for training organizations so they can measure their success. At least that's my interpretation of it. All right, folks, we're out of time. Here's our information. Thanks for joining. Tamer, thanks for co-presenting again.
Yeah,
it's like
my pleasure. And
you've been a co-host feels like dozens of times here, so it's great to have you again. Here are our sites, talentedlearning.com, Talented Learning Center, authenticlabs.io. You can reach out to Tamer and I via our email if you got any questions from today. Please link in with us. We're all on the same team here, so love to follow along with you professionally here on LinkedIn. And we didn't get to all the questions, unfortunately, as we ran out of time. But those that we didn't, Tamer and I will split them up and follow up personally to make sure that you get your questions answered. So everybody, thanks again for tuning into the 90th installment. We hope you have a great day, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you, John. Have a great day. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.